He said it with a smile. That was the worst part. Nadia had spent 40 minutes in front of the mirror that evening. Not because she was vain, but because she was negotiating. She was negotiating with the woman looking back at her. The woman with the wide hips and the full arms, and the face that her mother always called, a face that rooms remember. She was negotiating the terms of going out again after 3 months of telling herself she was done with blind dates. She lost the negotiation. She went. The dress was burgundy. She had bought it on a Tuesday afternoon, impulsively, the way people buy things they are slightly afraid to deserve. She had walked past the shop window, seen it on a mannequin, and felt something shift in her chest. Not joy exactly, more like recognition, like the dress had been waiting. She paid for it before she could talk herself out of it, took it home, and hung it on the back of her door, where she could see it from the bed. She had not worn it once in 6 weeks. She ironed it that evening. Then she ironed it again. The second time, she stood at the ironing board for a long moment, not really ironing, just holding the iron near the fabric and breathing slowly. The smell of warm cotton filled the small kitchen of her flat in Peckham. Her cat, a fat ginger thing named Clive, watched her from the top of the refrigerator, with the particular indifference of a creature who has already decided that whatever she is doing, it is not as important as he is. Her co-worker Priya had set it up. Priya was the kind of person who genuinely believed that all human problems could be solved through the right introduction. She had texted Nadia the details at lunch with 4 exclamation points. His name was Marcus. He worked in finance. He had a nice face, and, most importantly according to Priya, he preferred confident women. Nadia had read the word confident and set her phone face down on the counter. She knew what that word meant. She had been hearing it her whole life in exactly the same tone, from exactly the same type of person. It meant they expected her to make it easy for them, to laugh first, to put them at ease, to carry the discomfort of being herself in a room full of people who had opinions about how much of her there was. Confident. As if her size were a personality trait she had chosen and was now performing with flair. She went anyway. She went because Priya had genuinely kind eyes and genuinely bad judgment about men, and because Nadia was 29 years old and tired of eating dinner alone on Friday nights with Clive staring at her like she owed him something. The restaurant was in Mayfair, rooftop. Exposed brick, Edison bulbs, small plates served on flat gray stones instead of actual plates. The kind of place that had decided to be interesting the same way some people decide to have a personality, by taking away all the comfortable things and calling the result curated. The menu had no prices. Nadia always took note of that. No prices meant they wanted you to feel like asking was beneath you. She always asked. Marcus was already at the table when she arrived. He stood when he saw her. She watched his face in the 2 seconds before he controlled it. There was a flicker. A very small, very fast recalibration. The kind that happens in the space between expectation and reality, when the two of them shake hands and realize they are not at all the same meeting. His eyes moved, just once, down and then up again, and then the smile came, practiced and smooth and genuinely warm, in the way that things made in a factory can be genuinely well made. He was handsome. She noticed this, the same way she noticed the restaurant had no prices, with her eyes open. "Nadia," he said, and pulled out her chair. She sat down. She picked up the menu. She ordered the lamb, the bread, a glass of the house red, and a starter she did not need but wanted, because she had decided in the elevator on the way up that she was going to eat exactly what she wanted tonight, without doing the math in her head that she always did, the quiet subtraction of desire. Not tonight, not in the burgundy dress. Marcus ordered a salad and sparkling water. She did not hold this against him. People were allowed to order salads. He talked about his work first, which she had expected. Finance men always talked about their work first. He explained what he did in terms that were designed to sound complex, but were essentially about moving numbers from one column to another and taking a percentage when they landed. He was good at making it sound more interesting than that. She gave him credit for the skill. She talked about her work because he asked. She was a pastry chef, head pastry chef now, at a French restaurant in Marylebone that had 2 stars and a head chef named Pierre, who communicated primarily through meaningful silences and the occasional approving nod that she had learned to treat like a standing ovation. She had been there 4 years. She had started as a junior, worked every shift offered, stayed late without being asked, and eventually produced a salted caramel tart that Pierre had eaten standing over the pass at midnight, and then looked at her and nodded twice instead of once. That double nod was still the best moment of her professional life. Marcus listened politely to all of this. He asked one follow-up question. It was about whether pastry chefs made good money. She told him it depended on the kitchen. He nodded, as if this confirmed something. The lamb arrived. It was extraordinary. Slow-roasted, sitting in a sauce that tasted like someone had spent 3 days convincing it to be exactly that. She ate it with full attention. This was another thing people sometimes found uncomfortable about her. She ate like food mattered, which, given her profession, it did. The conversation found its rhythm after that. Not exciting, not awful. Dinner date rhythm. The back and forth of two people trying to locate something in common before the bill arrived. He was funny in a low-stakes way. She made him laugh twice with things she had not intended to be jokes. The wine was decent. The bread basket was above average, and she assessed it professionally, turning a roll over in her hand to check the crust before eating it, which made Marcus blink. "Do you always inspect your bread?" he asked. "Yes," she said simply. "Don't you?" He laughed. She almost liked him for a moment. The bill came. Something shifted in the air. She felt it before she understood it. A loosening, like a man who has been holding a difficult posture for too long and decides, at the moment of departure, that he no longer has to. He paid. She thanked him. She was already calculating how long the cab home would take when he leaned forward slightly and pressed his hands flat on the table. "Can I be honest with you?" he said. She had heard those exact words before. They never preceded anything good. Honesty offered with a preamble was never the generous kind. The generous kind arrived without announcement. "You're a beautiful girl," he said. He actually said it. Beautiful girl. As if he were issuing a certificate. As if beauty were a conditional pass. A thing he was granting her before the real sentence arrived. She set down her glass. "But you're too big for me," he said. "Physically. I should have said something earlier. I have a type. And I should have been up front. You're great, honestly. You're funny. And you're smart. But physically, it's just not there for me." He said it the way people announce flight delays. Regretful but inevitable. A fact about the universe that he was helpfully communicating to her so she could adjust her plans accordingly. A silence opened up at the table. Not an awkward silence. Something bigger than that. Something with weight and edges. The kind of silence that had been building since the moment he recalibrated his face in the doorway and decided to have dinner anyway. The kind that was always going to arrive. She had known it was coming since she watched his eyes do that small, fast trip down and up. She had known, and she had eaten the lamb and drunk the wine and made him laugh twice, and now here it was. She looked at him. He looked at her. She picked up her fork and finished the last piece of lamb on her plate. "Thank you for dinner, Marcus," she said. She said it cleanly. No edge on it. No performance of dignity, because dignity was not a performance. She gathered her bag from the back of the chair, pushed the chair in quietly, and walked to the lift. She stood in the lift alone. The doors closed. Between the 4th floor and the ground floor, she cried. 12 seconds. Not the ragged, messy kind. The other kind. The kind that comes from somewhere old and tired. From a place she had been carrying for longer than one bad dinner. The kind that knew exactly how to arrive, and exactly how long it had. The doors opened. She walked through the lobby with her back straight and her face composed, out onto the Mayfair pavement, where the evening air smelled like exhaust and cut grass from some distant park. She hailed a cab. Inside it, heading south, she built a tarte tatin in her head. The pastry first. She thought about the butter temperature, cold enough to stay in pieces, not so cold it couldn't be worked. She thought about the apple reduction, the exact shade of amber she wanted before she pulled it from the heat. She thought about caramelization, which was just the science of heat transforming sugar into something richer than itself. The way pressure could turn one thing into something entirely different. She thought about the butter all the way home. She did not think about Marcus at all. She let herself into the flat. Clive jumped down from the refrigerator and walked toward her slowly, in the way he always walked, as if he were doing her a significant favor by crossing the room. She picked him up. He allowed this for 4 seconds before deciding he had been gracious enough and dropped back to the floor. She took off the burgundy dress. She hung it back on the door where she could see it from the bed. She lay down without turning the lights off and stared at the ceiling and thought, I am so tired. Not of Marcus, of the recalibration in the doorway, of the word confident, of the beauty certificate issued before the verdict, of sitting across that particular expression at that particular type of table and already knowing, from the first 30 seconds, exactly how the evening would land and going ahead with it anyway, because she was 29 and lonely in the way that a full, busy life can still leave a person lonely, and she had not yet figured out how to stop hoping. She was tired of the hoping, too. Mostly the hoping. Clive jumped onto the bed and stood on her shin. Lord have mercy on this situation, she said to the ceiling. Clive sat down on her shin with his full weight and began to clean his ear. She turned the lights off. Outside, London continued being London, indifferent and enormous, and full of people in burgundy dresses, finding their way home. She lasted 2 weeks before Priya found out. Not because Nadia told her. Because Marcus had apparently told a mutual acquaintance that the date had gone fine but nothing clicked, which was the kind of sentence that carried exactly enough politeness to be covering something ugly, and Priya, who had the social instincts of a woman who grew up with 4 brothers and learned to read subtext before she could read full sentences, had pressed until the acquaintance gave her the actual quote. Priya called Nadia on a Wednesday morning, before the first kitchen prep shift, when Nadia was standing in the walk-in cooler of the restaurant counting the vanilla pods she needed for the afternoon batch of creme brulee. He said what? Priya said. It was not a question. It was a statement issued through a very small opening. It doesn't matter, Nadia said. She was still counting. 7, 8, 9. Nadia. Priya, I have 17 things to do before noon, and I am currently standing in a room that is 4 degrees, and I need to count these pods. He said you were too big for him. 10, 11, yes. Out loud. Generally, when people say things, they say them out loud. She closed the cooler door and moved back into the warmth of the prep kitchen. I'm fine. The lamb was excellent. Priya was quiet for a moment in the way that Priya was never actually quiet, just gathering. You should have poured the wine on him. I thought about it, Nadia admitted. But it was a decent red, and he didn't deserve it. The wine, I mean. He didn't deserve the wine near him. I am so sorry. I genuinely thought he was. You thought what you thought. He is what he is. She tied her apron. I'm truly fine, Priya. Stop looking at me like I'm a cracked egg. I can't see you. We're on the phone. I can hear the face you're making. There was a pause. I'm going to find you a better one. Please do not find me anything. I am in a very peaceful era of eating good food alone and not hearing the word confident used as a warning label. She picked up her knife. I have to go. Pierre has arrived. I can tell because the kitchen just got 10% quieter. She hung up. She was fine. She was largely fine. The problem was that largely fine and completely fine were different countries, and she spent the next 2 weeks crossing back and forth between their borders without a passport. During the day, she was excellent. The kitchen was a place where she made complete sense. The kitchen had rules she had spent a decade learning, and which she now understood well enough to break intelligently. The kitchen rewarded precision and patience and the willingness to start over without ego when something went wrong, and these happened to be 3 of her better qualities. She made a pear and cardamom tart that Pierre ate standing up and then nodded at once and said better, in a tone that, from Pierre, was approximately equal to a standing ovation from anyone else. During the evenings, she was mostly fine. During the middle of the nights, she was occasionally not fine at all. She would wake at 2 or 3 in the morning with a thought already forming, not even fully awake before it arrived, and the thought was always some version of the same thing. What if he was right? Not about being too big for him specifically, because she had considered Marcus and his opinions, and concluded that his opinions were the least interesting things about him, but the wider thing, the thing underneath the specific words, the question of whether she was simply too much, in some fundamental way that transcended dress sizes and rooftop restaurants. Too much of something that the world kept not quite having space for. She knew, in daylight, that this was not true. She had enough intelligence and enough self-awareness, and enough years of therapy, with a woman named Dr. Okafor, who had a very good listening face to know that this thought was not a fact. It was a feeling. A very old feeling that had learned to arrive at 2 in the morning when her defenses were down. She knew all of this. It did not always help. On the 14th night after the dinner, she got up at 2:15 and went to the kitchen and made bread. Not a recipe she was testing, not prep for the restaurant. Just bread, the simple kind, the kind she had watched her mother make in the kitchen of their house in Lewisham when Nadia was small. The kind that was less about the result and more about the process, about the particular work of pressing and folding and turning, the physical rhythm of it, the way her hands knew what to do without her mind having to manage them. She made the bread and let it rise and shaped it and put it in the oven, and sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cupboard, and Clive in her lap until the flat smelled like something warm was happening. She took the loaf out at 4 in the morning. It was not perfect. The crust was slightly too dark on one side because her oven ran hot on the left, and she had forgotten to turn it. She cut a slice, and ate it standing over the counter with butter, and it tasted like bread. Just bread. Simple, and real, and warm. She went back to bed. She slept. The gallery opening was her coworker Dan's fault. Dan ran the cold kitchen, had a boyfriend who was trying to be a sculptor, and had mentioned the opening 3 times over 2 weeks before Nadia agreed to go primarily to make him stop mentioning it. The gallery was in Bermondsey. The restaurant had been asked to cater the dessert portion of the evening's refreshments, which meant Nadia was attending in a professional capacity, which meant she was carrying a tray of small cardamom panna cottas in delicate glasses and wearing her white chef's jacket under a blazer she'd thrown on in the car, because the jacket alone felt too clinical for an art opening. The gallery was long and narrow and full of people who had opinions about negative space. The sculptures were large and angular, made of welded metal, which, once you spent enough time around them, turned out to be genuinely interesting if you thought about them as structures, rather than as attempts at meaning. She spent 4 minutes in front of one that was shaped like something between a question mark and a doorway, and thought about the pastry she was planning for the spring menu, which incorporated a similar principle of open structure, a cage of spun sugar around a soft center. Then someone handed her the tray again, and she moved through the room. The crowd shifted. Someone opened a door at the back and a new group arrived, and suddenly the room that had been comfortably full was just slightly too full, and everyone redistributed themselves in the way crowds do. She moved with them, head down slightly, watching the tray, mapping the path between elbows and raised glasses, calculating the route to the table in the back corner, where she needed to refill. She turned a corner. She walked into a wall. She felt the impact first, a solid, unyielding surface that she hit at medium speed with her right shoulder, and she registered 2 things in the same fraction of a second. The tray was going to go, and the wall was wrong. Walls did not have heartbeats. The tray did not go. A hand came from somewhere above her left shoulder and caught it, completely, without effort or theater, the way people catch things when catching things is simply what they do. One hand, all 12 glasses, steady. She stepped back. She looked up. The wall was warm. The wall was breathing. The wall was somewhere in the vicinity of 6 feet and 3 inches of dark suit, and a face that operated at a very specific and not entirely comfortable frequency. The kind of face that had clearly decided a long time ago that it did not need to perform anything for anyone, that it had simply arrived and the room could manage itself accordingly. He held the tray toward her. His eyes were dark, not unkind, just very still. "You all right?" he said. His voice was low and level, the kind of voice that did not need a room to be quiet in order to be heard in it. She took the tray from him. Her heart was going at a pace she chose to attribute entirely to the near miss with the glasses. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't see you." "I noticed," he said. She could not entirely read the tone. Not sarcastic. Not warm exactly. Just factual, in the way that someone states a thing that is true, without dressing it up. She nodded once and moved away. threading through the crowd to the corner table, setting the tray down and exhaling with more intention than she usually needed to exhale. She rearranged 3 glasses that did not need rearranging. She looked at the table for longer than the table required. She did not look back in his direction. This required more deliberate effort than it should have. She told herself it was the near miss with the glasses. 12 panna cottas. The caramel on top had taken her 22 minutes to get exactly right. Anyone would have a heart rate response to the near loss of 22 minutes of work. Across the room, she did not know this. 3 separate people had taken a half step back when the man in the dark suit had moved. Not because he had done anything. Not because he had raised his voice or shifted his posture. Just because of the particular quality of space he carried with him. The way certain things have a gravitational pull that exists before they do anything to earn it. His name was Damien Voss. She did not know this yet. He stayed in her peripheral vision for the rest of the evening without trying to. She noticed this without admitting she was noticing. She refilled the tray twice, moved through 3 more conversations with guests who wanted to discuss the panna cotta, had a brief and pleasant exchange with Dan's boyfriend about the large angular sculpture near the door, and at no point looked directly in Damien's direction. He left before she did. She noticed that too, later, when the room felt like it had shifted by a small degree, and she glanced toward the back, and he was no longer there. She packed up the remaining glasses with Dan, and walked out into the Bermondsey evening, and went home. She did not think about him. She thought about the spring menu. She thought about the cardamom ratios in the panna cotta, and whether to deepen them, or let the flavor stay subtle. She thought about the spun sugar cage, and whether it was too structural, or not structural enough. She thought about the way the hand had come from above her shoulder, and caught a full tray without a single glass shifting. The cardamom, she decided, could be slightly deeper. More warmth. The subtle version was safe, and she was very tired of safe. She walked to the tube. The city went on around her, large and indifferent and full of walls that turned out to be something else entirely. The message arrived 3 days later. Not a text, an actual message, delivered through the gallery owner, a woman named Caroline, who had the energy of someone who drank too much espresso, and genuinely loved art in equal measure. Caroline called Nadia at the restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon, and said, in a voice that suggested she found the whole thing enormously interesting, that a gentleman who had attended the opening had asked to pass along his contact information and a dinner invitation. "He didn't text you directly?" Nadia asked. She was standing at the pass, waiting for the oven timer. "He came into the gallery this morning," Caroline said, "gave me his card, and asked if I would be willing to pass it along to the chef who made the panna cotta. He was very specific about the panna cotta. The panna cotta was made by my entire kitchen. He said the woman who was carrying the tray when someone caught it." Nadia was quiet for a moment. The oven timer went off. She turned it off with one hand. "Did he say his name?" "Damien Voss," Caroline said. Nadia had not heard the name before. She did not know it. She had not looked him up, had not asked anyone at the gallery, had told herself 3 times in the past 3 days that she had no interest in knowing. She had not looked him up. She also had not entirely stopped thinking about a hand appearing from above her shoulder. "He said dinner," Nadia said. "Not drinks. Dinner." Yes, he was very clear about dinner. He also said, "And I am passing this along as requested," that there was no pressure, and that he was patient. Patient. She turned the word over. Marcus had been a man who wanted her to make things easy. Patience was a different kind of thing entirely. Patience implied that he had already decided something, had already moved past the stage of deciding, and was now simply giving her time to arrive at the same conclusion. She was not sure whether that was reassuring or alarming. "Do you know him?" she asked Caroline. There was a brief pause. "I know of him," Caroline said, in a particular way that was not exactly evasive, but was very carefully measured. "Which means what?" "Which means he is a very successful businessman, and people who work with him tend to speak highly of him." Nadia noticed what was not said, more than what was. "And people who don't work with him?" "Don't tend to speak about him at all," Caroline said pleasantly. She called the number on the card that evening from her kitchen. She was making dinner, or attempting to make dinner, though the thing on the stove had stopped being dinner. Somewhere around the second glass of water she'd added. and was now more of a situation. Clive was watching her from the refrigerator with his evaluating expression. He picked up on the second ring. "Damien Voss," he said. That voice. The same frequency as the gallery, lower and steadier than the surrounding noise. She had a sudden, vivid sense memory of the impact, her shoulder against something solid, the tray not falling. "This is Nadia Osei," she said. "You left a message with Caroline." "I did," he said. A brief pause. Not uncomfortable. Not filling itself with noise. "I'm glad you called." "I haven't agreed to dinner," she said. "I know." Another pause. She stirred whatever was happening on the stove. "You came to the gallery specifically to leave a message," she said. "Yes. Why not just text? Or ask Caroline for my number directly?" "Because I don't know you," he said, as if this were the most logical thing in the world. As if the distinction between asking someone for a stranger's number and going through a mutual contact to send an invitation were not one that many people in this era would have simply ignored. It seemed more appropriate to let you decide whether to reach back. She was quiet for a moment. Clive blinked at her once. She stirred the stove situation. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he said. "I choose the restaurant." There was a very short pause that she thought, though she was not certain, contained something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Of course. And I leave when I want to." "That was never in question," he said. She hung up. She looked at Clive. "Don't," she said. He began cleaning his ear. She turned back to the stove and decided that the situation had gone far enough, and that she was going to order food from the Thai place on the corner, and not make decisions about dinner, while standing in her kitchen, on a Tuesday evening, making a series of choices she was only partially sure about. She ordered the food. She sat at her kitchen table and thought about Thursday. The restaurant she chose was in Southwark, a small Italian place she had been going to since her first year in London, run by a Sicilian family, the kind of place that had been there for decades and had no reason to try to impress anyone. The tablecloths were white. The lighting was real. The pasta was made in the kitchen every morning by the owner's mother, who was 81 and had the posture of someone who had decided to be unbothered by the world and had maintained that decision for approximately 60 years. Nadia arrived first. She chose this deliberately. She wanted to be already seated, already in possession of herself, already the person in the room who had arrived rather than the person coming through the door under observation. She ordered water and a small plate of olives and sat with her back to the wall and her face to the door. Damien arrived at 7 exactly. She watched him come through the door. He moved the way certain people moved, not with performance, not with the self-conscious ease of a man who knew he was watched, but with the straightforward motion of someone who had long since stopped caring about entrances because they had more important things to think about. He spotted her without searching. He came to the table. He was wearing a dark jacket, open collar, nothing designed to announce anything. He sat across from her and looked at her in a way that she had not been looked at in a long time, not assessed, not measured against some internal scale of what she should be or how much of her there was. Just looked at. The way you look at something you are genuinely interested in. "You chose well," he said, glancing briefly around the room. "I always do," she said. Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, but the territory adjacent to one. The evening moved differently from the Mayfair dinner. Not slower, not faster, just differently, in the way that two completely different materials have completely different textures even when they are the same temperature. Marcus had talked about himself with the energy of a man building a case. Damien asked questions the way someone gathered information they actually needed, with focus and without pretense. And when she answered, he listened completely, without the performance of listening or the distracted half-attention she had grown used to in conversations with people who were waiting for their turn. She told him about the restaurant, about Pierre, about the double nod. He asked what the first nod meant, and she explained the gradations of Pierre's approval system, and he listened to the whole explanation with full attention, and she heard herself talking, and realized she was using her hands, which she only did when she was talking about food, and was not self-conscious about it. He did not make her self-conscious about it. He talked about his work in broad terms. Construction, primarily, he said. Development, He had projects in 4 countries. She asked him which 4, and he listed them: the UK, Italy, Portugal, and one in Dubai that was in its early stages. She asked about the Portuguese project because she had been to Lisbon once, years ago, and he talked about it with a specificity and a clarity that told her 2 things. He genuinely knew his work, and he was comfortable enough not to need to make it sound more impressive than it was. He was not performing for her. She noticed this. She noted the noticing. Midway through the main course, a man appeared at the edge of the table. She saw him in her peripheral vision before Damien did, or at least before Damien acknowledged him, which might not have been the same thing. A man in a well-cut suit, not a waiter. Someone who had come from outside the restaurant with the particular efficient urgency of a person delivering something that could not wait. He leaned down and said something quiet near Damien's ear. She watched Damien's face. It did not move. Not a flicker. Not an adjustment. He received whatever information arrived and processed it behind an expression so still it was almost architectural. He looked at the man once and said, "Tell him to wait." The man left. Damien looked back at her. "You were explaining the ganache," he said. "Not, sorry about that. Not, where were we?" Not the performance of smoothly returning to the conversation to show her how important she was compared to his work. Just the simple, direct statement of where they were, and the implicit invitation to continue. She looked at him for a moment. Then she continued explaining the ganache. She was in the middle of the technical portion, the part about emulsification, the way fat and liquid that had no reason to cooperate could be coaxed into a silky, unified whole, with the right temperature and the right movement, when she became aware of something happening at the next table. A man sitting 2 tables over, with his dinner companion, was looking at her in a particular way. She had learned to recognize the particular variety of this look, the slightly too long, slightly too evaluating kind, the kind accompanied by a small remark said too quietly to be heard, but with the body language of someone saying something at another person's expense. His companion, a woman, glanced at Nadia, and then looked away. She felt it the way you feel, weather before it arrives. The small, familiar tightening in the chest, the automatic, humiliating impulse to rearrange herself. Then she heard Damien's voice. He had not raised it. He had not turned his head more than a few degrees. He was still looking at her, still largely in the same position he had been in, but something in the quality of his attention had expanded, taking in the room without appearing to. He said it into the air, not loudly, not performing, just stating a thing that was true in the same tone someone uses to note that a door has been left open, or that a glass needs to be refilled. "She is perfect," he said. Not to her, not to the man 2 tables over, to the air, a correction, a statement of fact entering the room and settling there. She heard it land. 2 tables over. The man had turned back to his plate. She looked at her own food. She became aware that her hands were very still in her lap, not the active stillness of restraint, something quieter, the stillness of a person who has heard something and does not yet know what to do with it, because they have not heard it before, not in that tone, not stated like that, not like a fact rather than a gift or a performance. She looked up. Damien was watching her, not with expectation, not waiting to be thanked, just watching, in the same attentive way he had been watching all evening. "The emulsification," he said. "You were saying the temperature has to be exactly right, or it breaks." "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady. Inside her chest, something very old and very tired shifted by a small degree, the way things shift after a long time in one position. Not dramatically, not with any announcement, just a small, interior movement. She finished explaining the ganache. He listened to all of it. She did not go home the same woman who had arrived. She did not acknowledge this on the cab ride south. She looked out the window at the city going past, all its light and noise, and she thought about emulsification, about the way things that resist each other can, under the right conditions, be brought into something coherent and new. She thought about a hand catching a tray without a single glass shifting. She thought, not yet. She thought, slow. She thought, let's see what this is before you name it, because you are Nadia Osei, and you are careful about things that matter. She let herself into the flat. Clive came to meet her, which he almost never did, which meant he was either unusually glad to see her, or had knocked something over in her absence, and wanted to manage the narrative. She picked him up. He allowed 4 seconds. She was counting this time. She set him down. She stood in her kitchen for a long moment, and looked at the burgundy dress hanging on the back of the bedroom door, where she could see it from here. She had worn it again tonight. A different occasion, a different man, a different kind of evening. She did not iron it a third time. It did not need it. She went to bed. She did not lie awake at 2 in the morning. She did not rebuild tarts in her head to avoid thinking about other things. She simply lay down in the dark and felt the particular weight of an evening that had gone differently from the shape she had learned to expect, and she let the feeling be what it was without immediately covering it with something practical. Outside, London went on. Inside, a woman who had spent a very long time making herself smaller in rooms that didn't deserve her, lay in the dark and let herself take up exactly as much space as she needed. She slept. In the morning, she got up before sunrise, put on her work clothes, fed Clive, and went to the kitchen. She had a new recipe she wanted to test, a tart with a sponge sugar structure over a soft, dark center. She had been thinking about the architecture of it for weeks. The outer structure open, strong, clearly defined, the center warm and yielding. She started the pastry. Her hands knew what to do. She did not think about Thursday for the first 40 minutes. Then she thought about it once, briefly, and smiled at the pastry in a way that she was glad Clive was not there to see because he would have been insufferable about it. She folded the butter in. She began. 3 days after Thursday, he called. Not a text. She had already noticed that he did not communicate by text when he could communicate by voice. She had already noticed this, filed it, and told herself she had not filed it. He called at 9 in the morning, which was exactly the gap between her breakfast prep check and the start of service, and she would have found this suspicious if she had not concluded that the timing was less about calculated knowledge of her schedule, and more about the fact that 9 in the morning was a reasonable hour to call a person, and Damien Voss was, she was increasingly understanding, a man who did reasonable things in a very specific way. She was standing in the dry store of the restaurant counting almond flour when her phone went. She counted to the end of the shelf. Then she answered. You said Thursday or next week, she said by way of greeting. It has been 3 days, which is neither Thursday nor next week. Thursday was this week, he said. The next Thursday. You didn't specify, he said. His tone was even and very nearly amused, which on him sounded like a different thing than amusement sounded on most people. More deliberate, more chosen. She stood in the dry store in the dim light with bags of almond flour on either side of her. What did you want, Damien? I wanted to ask how you were. She was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable, just taking the question at face value, which it appeared to be, and deciding how to answer it honestly, without doing the thing she sometimes did, the thing of saying fine, when she meant something more specific. I'm good, she said. The tart I've been working on for the spring menu is coming together. I slept well last week, which I don't always. Clive knocked a glass off the counter this morning and looked me in the eye the entire time he was doing it. Clive, he said. My cat. Of course, he said, as if she were the kind of person who would name a cat Clive, as if he had already factored this information into his understanding of her, and found it consistent. How are you? She asked, because she had manners. Better than this morning, he said. I had a difficult call at 7. Do you want to tell me about it? No, he said, simply, without apology. But thank you. She leaned against the shelf. You called to ask how I was. Yes. And now you know. Yes. A pause. She could hear him breathing, very steadily, the way people breathe when they are not doing anything else. Just on the phone. Just present. Next week, she said. Next week, he said. I'll choose the place again. I expected nothing less. She hung up. She stood in the dry store for a moment, with the phone held loosely in her hand. The flour bags were stacked around her. The light came in under the door. Somewhere in the kitchen, someone dropped something metal, and Dan said a word he was not supposed to say in the kitchen. She finished counting the almond flour. She went back to work. She was not a woman who made decisions impulsively. She had never been. She was the woman who ironed the dress twice, who counted the vanilla pods, who folded the butter at exactly the right temperature, who understood that the difference between something holding together and something breaking apart was often a matter of small, precise choices made at the right moment. She was not going to hurry this. She was not going to let the part of her that had been starved for simple decency rush toward the first person who offered it, without looking carefully at what she was walking toward. But she was also not going to punch it down. She was going to let it rise. She was going to watch it. She was going to pay attention. And she was going to reserve the right to decide, at any point, what shape it was going to become. She had learned to make things from the beginning. She had learned that the best things, the real things, the ones worth the effort, could not be rushed. They took time. They took steady hands. They took the willingness to stay in the kitchen when the easier thing would be to leave. She had very steady hands. She knew how to stay. The spring menu was going to be extraordinary. She could feel it the way she always felt the good ones. Not with certainty, but with a kind of readiness, the feeling of being exactly prepared for the thing that was coming. She picked up her knife. She began.